This is What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico.
I'm James Campbell, and I'm damn fired up today, man.
Okay.
I'm Kanye West fired.
And I'm Chris Bell.
And Andy's not here, fortunately. What's Left America, produced by
I'm gonna say
Left
some
Out
crazy
Media.
I'm going to be very gentle today.
It's brought to you by Left Out Media and the generosity of our sponsors and friends, and hopefully someday friends just like you. Today on the show, we're going to cover lies, lost opportunities, and the TV president. The midterms, we got a special guest, Ed Peavy with Mission Control and the dark side of the GOP. And, of course, we're going to finish the show with Out of Left Field. Let's get right into it with lies, lost opportunities, and the TV president. Donald Trump certainly understands one thing, how to dominate a news cycle, and he does it masterfully. Unfortunately, he's leaving everything else behind in the meantime. President Trump promised to stop the opioid crisis when he was running for office. If you'll remember, he said that he was going to be priority number one. He did name it as an emergency, but then in his first budget, he cut the budget for the opioid crisis. But last week, he had a meeting in the Oval Office. He brought in people to talk to about the opioid crisis. He brought in Jim Brown and Kanye West. Now, if I was going to have a meeting in the Oval Office, that's who I would have brought in. I wouldn't have brought in doctors and health professionals. I would have brought in a retired running back and a rap star, because those are the people who can talk to me about how to stop the opioid crisis.
Yeah. So that also was supposed to be about criminal justice too, but just think about the backdrop of what was going on in the country when this whole minstrel show, and the Republicans don't like you to call it that because that somehow brings down this reality show that was going on. But the reality is you had people in Florida who just suffered a devastating hurricane going on. Then you had this precipitous drop in the stock market that was driving everybody
the president
crazy.
hasn't mentioned yet.
Yes. And you had all of this stuff going on, but yet you had time to give to Kanye West, who nobody listens to as any type of leader in the opioid or the criminal justice or any other venue. And, Jim Brown has always been he's a well-known social justice activist, but this president we're living a reality show, Chris. That's the bottom line. It's like this guy does not care about substance. All he cares about is the show.
That's right.
And dominating the news cycle with this silliness that charades as politics and policy, and like he's doing something substantive for the country, when in fact he isn't.
Well, Jim Brown was sitting there with sort of this what the fuck look on his face.
Jim Brown's using a cane now, but I know what was running through his mind was, can I still run?
Well, it was just it was extraordinary, and that rant that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. I couldn't tell you what he was talking about if my life depended on it.
And the guy who comes on CNN, Bakari, basically says, this is what happens when Negroes don't read. I want to extend that to say, this is what happens when people don't read. A Donald Trump happens when you don't pay attention to what's going on in the country.
That's so unfair, James. He does pay attention. He saw on Saturday Night Live that Kanye West had been denied an opportunity to wear the Make America Great Again hat. And so he
genuflect to Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was paying attention. And so that's how you get to weigh in on the opioid crisis.
What we saw the other day was what happens when people don't take their medication. That's what we saw.
Yeah, and it was sad that he allowed that to continue sitting there like this guy was saying something that anybody with any intelligence should listen to.
Yeah. Tried to act like it was great.
Yeah. Or it was important.
In the meantime, Jim Brown, who started sitting as straight up, got into one of those, what we call in the hood, gangster leans, and he kept leaning over and over and over to the point where he was leaning on the cane.
If his chair didn't have arms, he'd have fallen out of it.
That would have been the finest thing if he just fell out of the chair.
If it didn't have an arm, he would have fallen out of it.
But the sad thing, I just want to finish this one point. The sad thing about it is, if you looked at the conservative pundits who came on that night, all of them were in support of what they heard in the Oval Office.
What did they say they heard?
They said they heard that people, the liberals, don't like Kanye because Kanye supports the president's agenda, and that Kanye says that the president is doing more for African Americans than Barack Obama did.
He didn't say that, though.
Well, basically, that's what they were saying. They basically extrapolated from Kanye's show that Donald Trump is doing more.
Well, the one thing I do remember that he said that I could comprehend is that we needed to make Donald Trump look good, because if he looked good, then it makes the country look really good. So that's just the biggest bunch of bullshit that I've ever heard. That's not our responsibility. If the guy is screwing up, I think we have a duty to say so.
But he also went to this cap makes me feel like Superman. And I mean,
and Donald Trump. I didn't have a father growing up, and Donald Trump is now my father.
Oh yeah, well, what's Donald Trump's youngest son name?
Donald Trump Jr.
No,
the other one, Eric
Barron. I wonder how many times Barron has played catch with him. I wonder how many times.
Or tag.
Well, he's 71. He doesn't play tag anymore. All right, I want to talk about this. Donald Trump wrote an op-ed, or somebody wrote for him an op-ed that USA Today published last week. Did y'all see this?
That was a shame.
It was horrible.
It was a shame.
Every line was debunked as an untruth.
Yes.
And the Washington Post finally called out and said, we have to stop doing this. We have to stop publishing what President Trump says just because President Trump said it. We have to start calling out these lies for these lies. And they called out the USA Today. USA Today tried to defend it, but really what it was just they published it just because President Trump wrote it. And what USA Today is saying is you can't publish these lies in the first paragraph and then go down 5 paragraphs later and say, we fact-checked this and these parts are untrue, because the public only reads the headline in the first paragraph and they never get down to the bottom where you fact-checked it.
So this is something I know something about. I don't know a lot about a lot, but this is something
we've come to know that.
I'm glad you recognize that, Chris. Have I reached Kanye West level?
No.
Okay, thank you.
We'll let you know when you do.
Good. I'm glad. I served for 14 years on the Houston Chronicle's editorial board, and 4 of those years I was assistant Outlook editor, where I would edit op-eds, and Sister Andrea Georgeson does that now. But one of the things that we were really careful about is the op-eds that we received from politicians or anybody, and we made sure that we fact-checked them. And that is what I hold against USA Today. This is an institution that has an ombudsman on staff who can look at these things, but not only do they have an ombudsman, they have editors who look at that stuff and should be able to fact check it almost instantly. So it was no reason why they couldn't have circled back to whoever wrote that for Donald Trump and say, look, we fact checked this, and this does not support it anywhere. And so that was a simple question, a simple phone call that they could have made that could have made that op-ed, at least factual, if not, as crazy as it read.
Whenever I've written an op-ed for the Houston Chronicle here in Houston where we live.
You've actually had one published?
More than one.
Really?
Thank you.
Okay.
And every time I've sent
Proud
one in,
of you,
when they were going to publish it, the editor called me and said, I need you to show me where you got this, and where you got this.
That's exactly right.
And if I couldn't, they made me find it or take it out.
Yes.
But the reason I brought this up is what the Washington Post is saying over and above what the USA Today did was what they're saying to every publication and every TV station, we have to stop publishing the lies the president is saying every day.
Well,
we have to stop.
And I think that's what's sort of being overlooked in talking about the standards of journalism and what have you. I think it's incredible that you have a president who would submit this op-ed piece with no facts.
Right.
With just a bunch of lies. And so they're taking the whole fake news thing to a whole new level.
He calls fake news, fake news, fake news, and he's the one doing it.
Yes. So we had Rod Hicks on several weeks ago from the Society of Professional Journalists talking about his role of going out and explaining to people why newspapers and media is credible. But when you have USA Today publish a piece by someone, just because he's president doesn't give him the ability to publish anything he wants.
Or to create the news.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is the kind of thing that brings the kind of fake news charges that Trump can make on the stops. Now, what were they trying to do? Win favor with him or something by publishing this?
And wouldn't it be better journalistically if you're going to publish that to say President Trump drafted this op-ed, the lies start now?
No. No. It would have been more credible for them to have done the same thing that the Washington Post did and call it out. And I haven't read USA Today, the Sunday paper, but the ombudsman normally writes a column about it. If they did not write a column basically calling out all the lies that were in that op-ed, then shame on them. Right. Because again, Chris, like you said, that wasn't hard work. That was just due diligence.
Right.
Mr. Tritico, we have a line in this story that we need you to substantiate.
Yeah, you wrote it. Prove it.
Yes.
Right.
And that's simple due diligence.
Right.
And it's a shame that a publication like USA Today has to be brought down to this fake news level by somebody who perpetuates this all the time. We can't even talk about lies anymore, or damn lies, because they're told so often by so many in this administration.
I just find it's incredible to me that the person who's calling out fake news all the time is the one creating it.
But then we get back to this whole form over substance debate. I want to back up just a minute because we spent all that time talking about Kanye West, and I know he was there to talk about criminal justice, but he was also there to talk about the opioid crisis, which is a huge crisis and has to be dealt with. And
never came up.
Who's talking about that?
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
As a result of that complete circus that went on inside the Oval Office. And I think that's really too bad because people do need to understand it. I'll be honest. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the opioid crisis until last year and happened upon a magazine article and started reading, and I was like, it blew me away how far this has gone and how many sectors of society it has touched, and it's not going away.
Right.
And Congress and other legislative bodies better get serious about it.
Well, even Fox News has started calling out Trump on his the stuff that he does. Like one of the hosts of Fox and Friends called him out when he mocked Dr. Ford during a rally. Fox has been his mouthpiece. And Fox has allowed him almost carte blanche to say anything he wanted, and he could just make lies up on the fly, and nobody would care, right? Nobody would call him on it. But we're talking about USA Today, which is a national publication that a lot of people read at their hotels or on the plane or wherever, and you can't allow this to stand as credible news because sometimes people don't read past the first paragraph or they just read the headline and they take that as
the news.
And if you don't read down into that, if you are not a political animal or someone who reads like every day, like my retired dad who has time to read the paper from cover to cover, you basically are looking at the headlines and then taking that as like real news when it's like fake news. And that's the travesty of what USA Today did.
So last thing on this, Fox News announced last week that they will stop carrying Trump's rallies live.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. But I think that he's oversaturated it. I mean, he has so many, and I think Fox News said we're losing money on this deal.
Well, people,
what did they offer as their excuse? I never did hear. Sorry,
they didn't say. They just said we're not carrying it live anymore. And I just think that the people stopped watching is what happened. I think personally they had so many of those that the public stopped watching, and it wasn't fun anymore.
Well, so Fox News tries to say that their news arm is different from their
they try.
Their editorial opinion piece, when in fact they merge all the time, and they absolutely merge with these with these Trump rallies that go on, almost every week. That's where Trump is most comfortable. That's where he's the most fun, and he's talking to his base, not only wherever he is, but he's also talking to the millions of people that watch Fox News, and that's unfortunate.
But at the end of the day, it's about money for them, and I think the ratings start going down. They have to switch to something else, and they're going to give him interviews as opposed to those rallies. Is what's going to happen. He's going to get more interviews and less rally. All right, we're going to have to move on. All right, we're coming up next, midterms. We're going to talk with our special guest, Ed Peavy. We're going to get him on the line here coming up right now. On the line with us is Ed Peavy. He's with Mission Control. That's a group that helps Democratic candidates. They've done a lot of work. They've helped elect 7 governors, 8 members of the United States Senate, 9 mayors to major U.S. cities all across the country. Thanks for joining us, Ed.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's a great deal. Listen, we want to talk with you about the midterm election. It's coming up real quick here. Everybody's been talking all year long about this blue wave, and then we had the Kavanaugh thing, and you see the Republicans tighten that race up, and it looks like with the Kavanaugh thing, the Republicans got a little bit energized, tightened the race up pretty tight. How do you see things going?
Look, I mean, clearly the Kavanaugh thing tightened things up. I'm not sure the Kavanaugh thing tightened things up more than they would have eventually tightened up before. I mean, the numbers and the way the atmosphere was through the summer was historic in favor of the Democrats. So the idea that, the Republicans finally got awakened to the midterm is not a complete shock. I still think the Democrats' chances, particularly in the House, are very good, as I'm sure most people listening know. It was a historically bad Senate map, so the fact that we're still competitive in the Senate, I think, is a positive. But you're dealing with states where Trump won. You have to run through a bunch of states where Trump won by 10 or 15 points to even have a shot, which is very hard to do. The House map, I've been predicting since January of 2017 that we would be somewhere between 30 to 40 seats in picking up, which I still think is a pretty good bet. If things go much better than we hope, it could be as many as 40. But I do think, or 40 to 45. But I do think the House map is still holding in there. A lot of the polling that I have seen have shown, in this quote Kavanaugh effect, have shown Republicans bouncing up a couple points, particularly in the kind of suburban and exurban areas, but nothing close to what they need to be and nothing close to what they were in, say, 2010 and 2014.
Ed, so what has to happen for the Democrats to pull off this blue wave? I've been hearing that Hispanics have to vote almost in record numbers. Democrats generally don't vote as much as Republican in midterm races. So percentage-wise, how much do we have to exceed the norm in order for this to happen?
So I think the best thing to look at, and luckily I had a front row seat to this, is I did the Virginia governor's race in 2017. And at this point, I still think that is a good guide to what happened, to what could happen and what the midterms could look like. And Ralph Northam, who got elected governor and got elected with a record margin, what ended up happening in Virginia was Ralph Northam, in 2013, Terry McAuliffe won a very close race to be governor. In 2017, Ralph won by 9. What ended up happening is Ralph Northam ended up with 450,000 more votes than Terry McAuliffe got. However, the Republican in 2013 and 2017 got essentially the same number of votes. So this massive surge we saw was driven very much by the suburbs and the exurban. Be clear, Hispanic vote, at least in Virginia, was up. African American vote was up. Asian American vote, which is an undercounted but also very big Democratic constituency, was also way up. And so while it wasn't, and the Democrats in the state house, we targeted, they were down by 16 seats. They didn't have a ton of money, so they ended up targeting, say, 9 of the 16 and ended up winning 15. And essentially, we, as Democrats, we won or essentially tied every race where Trump got under 50%, right? We talk a lot about the districts Trump won or Trump lost. To me, the metric, at least on the House side, is where Trump was relative to 50. And I think my math could be wrong, but I think there are 38 seats that Trump was under 50 in 2016. I feel very good that Democrats will do very well in those seats.
Ed, I'm curious about your geographic perspective, because I know Mission Control does work throughout the United States. And here in Texas, where we have Beto O'Rourke, has taken a very nice guy approach, trying to run a very positive campaign, not really going after Ted Cruz, not really going after Donald Trump. I assume that's not the case in a lot of other parts of the country. So what are you seeing and what do you think is working?
So 2 things. One, the other thing that has happened for Democrats on the House side is we have some of the most remarkable candidates running with amazing bios. I mean, I think my firm is dealing with somewhere between, say, 17 to 20 candidates who are red the blue. A lot of them are, veterans who did 3 tours. We have, women. We have a, women helicopter pilot who also was a prosecutor in New Jersey. We have another woman who was a senior Navy officer in Virginia Beach. And so we have all these candidates with these amazing stories and credentials. So our campaigns as a whole, Democrats' campaigns, have been more positive than they've ever been. Still, there's still a big degree of negative, but there is more positivity than ever, in large part because of, and this is a little different than the Beto reason, just because we have candidates that have these remarkable bios, and as voters hear about them, they flock to them. The Republicans, most Republican candidates I'm running against have run one or zero positive ads the entire campaign.
And they're all
Republicans who.
And what does that tell you if they're doing that they're in trouble?
They're in deep trouble. Look, I also had a lot of races in 2010 when Democrats lost 63 seats, so I know where they're coming from. And, we quickly decided in 2010 the only way we as Democrats could hold on was to try to disqualify the Republicans. It didn't work, but that was what we had. That is pretty much what they're doing. They're in a really weird situation because, look, there's enough seats in suburban districts to just about take the House. And I don't know if you got, so a great example is in 2000, we're doing Colorado 6, which has kind of been one of these districts that Democrats have been trying to win for years against Mike Kaufman. And Mike Kaufman famously ran an ad in 2006 about how he'll stand up to Trump. He said he'll stand up to Hillary or Trump. Obviously, those are words he is now eating. And what you're not seeing is Republicans do anything about trying to moderate themselves. A couple have, but very few have. And I think they're very worried that their base is so pro-Trump that they can't really tell the voters that they're against Trump. But at the same point, Trump has, 40% job ratings in most of these districts. So not being, that there's just the vast majority of the voters want somebody who will stand up to Trump or at least put a check on him, which they won't do or even talk about. like I said, on the Democratic side, we're positive, but it's a lot of bio.
So, Ed, resume is everything, and having a remarkable candidate is great. But the thing that most concerns me, at least, is that I'm not hearing a message that is one of those galvanizing, really inspirational. I guess what I'm saying is Trump has Make America Great Again. Obama had Yes, We Can. What's the message that's resonating with the Democratic constituency now and even independents?
Well, I will say two things. One, I believe that if we're going to win the House and do well in the Senate, we should not have a party message, because we have to win in various parts of the country that are vastly different, right?
So
and
one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
One size doesn't fit all, and both those examples you brought are great ones, but they're both presidential races. And, so I don't think we have a message. I will say we do have a set of, things like health care, and what the Republicans have done in health care have probably been a factor in almost every campaign in the country. And there's a thing that you've seen in a lot of districts where Democrats talk about, look, I'll work with Trump when he's right, but I'll stand up to him when he's wrong, which is something that, particularly in red states, is a very rational thought to voters, even whom are not totally against Trump, but believe, any voter that any rational person would be with Trump sometimes and against him other times.
So
in terms of,
go ahead.
Look, I will say again, going back to Virginia, I don't know if you guys followed it at all, and if you were doing this podcast back in time, but we working for Ralph Northam. If you watch Morning Joe the week before, literally every panel was about how Ralph Northam is blowing it, how Ralph Northam has no energy, has no message. That Gillespie, our opponent, has this great galvanizing. Be clear, his message was just negative, but that he has this really tight message and all this stuff. And we ended up winning by 9 points with turnout that has never been seen in a midterm before. I do think voters are looking for, one of the things they're looking for from Democrats is a bit of stability, right? Like if you hate Trump, one of the things you hate about him is all the noise, all the twittering and all the other stuff he does. So having a Democrat who is just stable is exactly what people are looking for, because they just want a country that functions.
The hardest thing, I think, to for a midterm election, the hardest thing is to get voters motivated and get them to the polls.
Correct.
And you've seen that time and time again in a midterm election. And I think the last midterm was the lowest voter turnout in history, as I recall. I may be wrong about that, but I think it was the lowest voter turnout we ever had. So definitely. How do you get voters motivated? I mean, how does the Democratic Party get their voters to the polls?
Right. Well, look, two things have to happen. One, you have to have the environment for it, right? As the two worst turnout years we as Democrats have had are 2010 and 2014, when we controlled the White House and had absolutely no energy at all. Obviously, we had a much better energy in 2006 when there was a united hatred. And look, I hate to say it, but what makes voters vote is anger, and there's a lot of anger out there. You guys started by talking about the different demographic groups. I think that's a very important thing, and I do think that'll be what comes down to if the energy is there for each group. I mean, I believe strongly that college-educated women, particularly women in the suburbs, are going to vote. They're going to vote early. They're going to vote by noon. Like, there will be a massive influx of female college-educated women. They've been voting in all these specials. They voted every time. Earlier, you talked about Hispanic vote. I think that's the big question. And I do think that we as a party need to be doing more and more conversations and trying to bring people into this process. It's not just, hey, vote against Trump because he's done all these bad things on immigration. It is really trying to do, a lot more one-on-one conversations, a lot more field, a lot more door-to-door stuff. I believe that this year there's a lot more of that happening than before. Just using Texas as an example, I do think 2014 was, a really tough year for us, not just in terms of turnout, but just in terms of process. That I think we missed a lot of opportunity to talk and engage voters. I think a lot more of that is happening this year. It'll be interesting to see. The midterm to me is, I think it's going to be a good midterm. If Hispanic vote, African American vote, and almost even more voters under 35 get energized and turn out, it could be a great year. Those are people we're just not seeing in polls.
So, Ed, one of the things that concerns me is the post-Kavanaugh message of Trump to those suburban white women about it could be your son. I don't know if that resonates with them in a sense, if particularly if they were independent or thinking about voting Democratic. Do you think that will have any effect?
Not at all. That's a message for if Kavanaugh has an effect, it does have an effect with suburban men, not women. Suburban women are lost at this point too. I mean, not that they can go back to being Republican, but every poll post Kavanaugh I have seen, in every public poll post Kavanaugh, have been brutal. 30-point gender gaps. I think ABC today had women, plus 30 to vote for Democrats. Look, the Republican post, to me, the message that they're trying to push post Kavanaugh, and could have some effect, is less about the sons and more about this Democratic mob mentality that all these Democrats are out to, get everybody. And that's something that, has resonated with voters before. I don't, we'll see what happens.
But Ed, I might have to push back a little bit, because I really do think Brett Kavanaugh has kicked in the glass ceiling for privileged white males in this country.
Well, as somebody who went to a rival high school of Kavanaugh and was 2 years behind him in school, there's nothing that happened that I don't believe.
Thanks a lot,
With
Ed.
that, we're going to leave it there. Ed Peavy with Mission Control Consultants. Thank you so very much for joining us. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, let's move on. The dark side of the GOP. We watched Mitch McConnell as minority leader block everything Obama did for 8 years. He famously said when Obama was elected, it's my job to ensure he's a one-term president. During his term, he blocked virtually all of his economic bills, all of his judicial appointments. He didn't care that he let the country suffer while he was doing it. He made up a theory to block Merrick Garland, and recently showed that when he was asked if he would support a Trump appointment as a justice to the Supreme Court in Trump's last year, and he said, of course he would do it, because if we're in power, he gets an appointment. He is a purely partisan person, and he showed that in his time in the Senate.
Absolutely. I think if you think about it, the Senate is supposed to be that check on the craziness that will happen in the House. And Chris, you were over there with some of that craziness. But Mitch McConnell has basically shown himself to be an incredible partisan animal, where it's a zero-sum game with him, and it's all about winning. And it doesn't matter what the collateral damage is, what the damage is to the Senate's reputation. And he's basically been very, not even subtle about it. I mean, saying, to paraphrase, that my whole, being is to stop everything that Obama does. And so that's been his mode of operation in the Senate. And it's shown with these judicial nominations that Merrick Garland is the most egregious example of that. But he also bottled up other judicial nominations, and that's why Harry Reid changed the rule.
That's right.
And that's why I was discussing this today. Somebody was bemoaning the Electoral College, and I'm really against getting rid of some of those institutional pieces, because it could always come back around to bite you. And this rule change that Harry Reid did basically came back around to bite the Democrats.
That's what I said.
So, yes, if you're saying that Mitch McConnell has turned the Senate into the House, absolutely.
Well, I've said it before, and I don't want to keep beating the dead horse, but they care about one thing in the Republican Party, and that is winning. And they don't care how they get there or how it looks. They just want to win. And that's all they cared about with Brett Kavanaugh. The decent thing to have done was probably when things were getting completely out of control and the whole process had become a circus, that he should have withdrawn. It would been good for him. It would have been good for the country. But no, instead they just amp it up, and they wanted to win. And Mitch McConnell knows who he's leading. Look at all of them. It's not just Mitch McConnell. It's John Cornyn here from Texas, who used to be sort of a quiet leader and I think somewhat respectable. He's not respectable anymore. I mean, he just falls right in line with Donald Trump, someone who he apparently had very little respect for. But there he was, just talking as loudly as anyone during the Kavanaugh hearings and every other issue that comes along. And so it is sad to see what it's become, and it's somewhat incredible that a lot of Republicans don't even seem to understand what's happened to them.
No, I mean this is no longer the party of Lincoln. It's a party of ultra nationalists that have that it's.
But it's not the party of George Bush either.
Right.
It's not the party of Reagan, and it's not the party that so many people said that they were joining. I'm 58, and I think anybody you talk to around my age would tell you they joined the Republican Party because they thought Ronald Reagan was such a great president, and they thought he, epitomized what someone should be as president. And I've heard that over and over when I served in Congress from the Republican side. It was all about Reagan, and he was the icon. Well, this isn't his party anymore.
And you can see that with people like John Boehner, who I saw a couple of weeks ago speaking, and he basically said, I retired because I couldn't, control the inmates anymore.
Right.
And so Boehner is not a moderate Republican. Boehner is as far right as you could possibly be.
Yeah, but he liked getting things done.
He liked getting things done. And what he said was if they saw him go up to the White House, they would say, oh, Boehner's giving in to Obama. If Obama was on the golf course with Boehner, the left would say, oh, he's giving in to Boehner.
And then they forced him out, and they put Ryan in, and then they forced Ryan out.
But let's use Boehner as an example, and to show how much things have changed. When George W. Bush was president, he worked with Ted Kennedy and John Boehner. I know they were some of the key players in getting the education reform bill passed. And when I went to Congress, I remember Boehner talking about who he had worked with on the left. Now, can you imagine something like that happening today? Of course not.
Right.
That you can't put together that type of coalition because they've demonized anybody who actually wants to work with the other side to get things done. And if that doesn't change, I don't think the American people are going to continue to put up with us.
No, as a matter of fact, if you remember when Donald Trump said when they were trying to fashion a bill for immigration earlier this year, he said, go work something out and I'll sign it. And they briefly had a bipartisan bill together, and the Republicans got together and said, we're not doing that. We are not going to let the president sign a bipartisan bill. And the Republicans killed it.
Right. So I think most Americans are in the middle on a lot of things. They just want to see things get done that helps their lives move forward. And you don't have that happening in Congress now. And that's a shame because, as Chris said a moment ago, all they care about is winning. They don't want to work together to do anything right. The Affordable Care Act is an example of that.
A Republican bill.
Yes. So it didn't need to be dismantled. It was an imperfect legislation when it was drawn up. But the way Social Security and Medicare and all the great programs that we have that help people now, the way they succeeded was that the Congress worked on them incrementally to fix the flaws in that legislation, and it became part of people's lives.
But better than that, your point is even better than that. That was a Republican idea that President Obama said, you know what, let's take this Republican idea and use it and work with it. And they then turned on it because Obama said, let's use it.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you saw Mitt Romney doing all those mental gymnastics when he was running for president. It was his proudest accomplishment as the governor of Massachusetts to get health care reform passed. It was very much like Obamacare.
Right.
And then having to act like he had nothing to do with it.
Right.
It was somewhat comical, and it makes no sense. And I think it's coming back to bite him in the ass this time, especially if you listen to what Ed Peavy was just saying and what we've seen here in Texas. I've seen ad after ad talking about the Republicans' position on health care, which suggests to me the American people are waking up and realizing what's going to happen if that is abolished, and that the Republicans haven't put a damn thing on the table to replace it.
Still they haven't.
That's you mean the American people are woke?
Thank you, Andy.
I'm glad they woke.
I thought Andy was out of town. Her spirit is living.
Her spirit is here. All right, that's all the time we have. Let's move into out of left field. Who wants to go first?
I'll let you go, Mr. Tritico.
I'm going first? All right, I will go first. All right, my out of left field today is about Uber. You know, last week my associates were talking about Uber, and Uber apparently now the Uber driver gets to rate you as the passenger, and I didn't know this. And so they told me to look at my Uber app and see what my Uber rating was. And my Uber rating is 4.76. And they started laughing. And they said, that is incredibly low. And it turns out that my Uber rating is low because I don't talk to the Uber driver when I'm in the car. And the reason I don't talk to the Uber driver when I'm in the car is because I didn't get in there because I was lonely. I got in there because I want you to take me to the place I need to be. If I wanted to talk to somebody, I would have had you take me to a therapist. I don't need you to talk to me. I need you to give me a ride, and I'm going to pay you for that ride, and I'm going to give you a very nice tip for doing that. But I don't want to talk to you.
So
why are you rating me low?
What is a high Uber rating?
I don't know, but they laughed at me for my 4.76 because I'm not talking to the Uber drivers. Here's a message to the Uber drivers. It's not fair that you're rating me low because I don't choose to talk to you. I'm still going to tip you. Just because I don't want to talk to you does not mean that you should give me a low Uber rating.
Well, God forbid you get drunk and throw up in the back seat sometime.
Okay, to Uber drivers, whitish gray hair, a little bit of a gut.
That's my out of left field.
My out of left field is really out of left field, like Kanye West was out of left field last week in the Oval Office. And my point is this. When you see people like Kanye West go before the President of the United States, and he's anointed somehow as a leader in the African-American community, don't believe that hype. There are leaders in the African-American community who are experts in opioids, criminal justice, social justice. Kanye West is not one of them. So, Mr. President, if you want to be credible, call somebody into the Oval Office who knows what they're talking about and not someone who's going to rant like Kanye West did, like a man who needed his meds.
Or just do something about it.
Yeah.
My out of left field this week is a recommendation for everyone to check out a Netflix series called Bobby Kennedy for President. I was watching the second and third episodes of that. I believe it's 6 parts altogether. But I was floored because, of course, they get into 1968 and that campaign. And what they are talking about from 50 years ago reminds you so much of what's going on today, the divide in the country. They showed the people who were going out and rallying against the civil rights movement that was taking place at that time. And you look at some of those faces and they look very similar to some of the people you see filing into the Trump rallies. And history always has a way of repeating itself, and we ought to be very mindful of that. And I hope it'll go from being a out of left field topic to maybe a topic on the show sometime, because I think it's very important that we address it and don't deny it and bring it out in the open as much as possible.
And you just woke people up again.
And woke.
That's all the time we have this week. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and please rate us on iTunes. More important than that, you need to subscribe. That's it. That's what it's all about, is subscription. So get 3 friends to subscribe to us. Go to Libsyn or your favorite podcasting site and subscribe to What's Left America. Much thanks to Keegan DeLeo, our in-studio producer. We'll see you next week.